Hello and welcome everyone to today's PRC Health Meet the Media session and for giving up your lunch hour to join us today. We're lucky enough to be joined with Ashley Pearson, an independent content and strategy consultant, actually joining us from Turkey at the moment. Ashley has written for several top-tier international media outlets, including Forbes, the Wall Street Journal, and the BBC, as well as several UK newspapers. Ashley is going to talk to us today about her insights and experiences as a professional storyteller, and provide some tips to help us work better with journalists and help to land health stories within the media. As always, this is going to be an open discussion, so if you do have any questions, please do pop them in the chat and we'll try and answer them as quickly as we can. And also, if you are tweeting today, please make sure that you include hashtag PRCA Health along with your post so we can track everything. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to my colleague Ishtar and Ashley to take away the discussion.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, guys. So we're really excited to have Ashley with us today. For those of you who don't know her, she is a bubbly, effervescent personality and a media powerhouse. I've been lucky enough to work with her over the past, I think it's been 6 months, hasn't it, Ashley? But she has been working in media much longer than that and been smashing it both in the US and then more recently in London. But I want to just start with kind of how did you get your start in media? I think that's a great kind of background for people who don't know you as well. How did you get your start? What drew you to media, and kind of how did you make the move from the US to the UK?
Well, great question. I'm very happy to be here. Thanks for having me. I started out in news at NBC in London a long time ago, and I had dreams of being a foreign correspondent. And then I actually met the foreign correspondents, and they had pretty miserable, sad lives. They were on their third or fourth marriage. Some had a drinking problem. And I thought, you know what, maybe this isn't the life for me, in and out of a suitcase going to war zones. So I went to New York. I was part of the launch team for MSNBC, and I worked on politics. I worked on kind of hard-hitting stories. And then 9/11 happened, and I worked on that story exclusively for a while. And then, of course, we went into Afghanistan, and then we bombed Iraq, and I was working on that. And I got very burned out on death. So I started doing showbiz. I had always really liked gossip and showbiz. And so I was doing both actually for several years. I became the entertainment producer for MSNBC, and I was still working on a political news show at the same time, which was really a trip. But I've always loved that kind of high-low of, I've been someone who, reads the tabloids and then also reads the FT. I like that high-low. I like just information, I guess. And then I moved to London about 15 years ago, and I had a slot on a TV show, and I had a column in The Express. I became an editor at the Daily Mail, and contributing editor, and I started doing a lot of lifestyle and travel writing as a journalist. And then about 10 years ago, I was looking to transition into more of a comms role, because I had done some time at Porter Novelli in New York, and I always liked comms. And I started working with agencies and brands, both with founder owners and also big agencies, consulting on how to get coverage specifically. I kind of an earned media specialist, because I was coming at it from the journalist perspective. I was able to quickly identify what was a story, what wasn't a story, and what might resonate. And also I have a lot of great colleagues who are now editors. And so I get my emails read. So that helps. I get a lot of cut through, and I'm able to kind of advise on what works. And so I work on media strategy, and I have done that for about 10 years in a wide range of sectors, including health, but also fashion and fintech and beauty and a lot of luxury travel and just a wide range of sectors. I've been working for about a decade, and I think what sets me apart from the average journalist who comes in and tells the PR, this is what I don't like, don't chase me, stop doing this. The difference is I've sat in your chair for 10 years as well. So I know the constraints, the things you're up against, the pressures from clients who you have a call with that morning, and they're going to say, where's my coverage? And I understand that's why you're chasing that morning, because you have a client call, and they're going to ask you, and you want to know what to tell them. I chased and they told me next week, or they told me they don't know. And so I get it from your side of the chair, but I'm also still a working journalist. 1 day a week, I still write. I'm a Forbes advisor. I write for Vogue. I write for Condé Nast Traveler. So I'm the Wall Street Journal. I'm still writing. And so I'm able to kind of see both sides of the coin. And I think that's what enables me to give good advice.
Yeah, I love that. And I mean, you have kind of found this niche as almost a jack of all trades in terms of media stuff, which is really cool, a cool place to be. And I think, in terms of seeing all sides, different sides of the newsroom, right? Like in front of the camera, producing stories, kind of chasing down stories, and and then as a PR or comms person as well. So I guess in terms of trying to formulate a great story, and I know most of the people in the room are coming from like a health perspective, so a great health story. I think a lot of people, we can speak really well to the trade journalists because that's where we feel comfortable. Where we struggle sometimes is to get cut through in those big, kind of major metro top tier publications. It's like, and we are balancing the needs of our client, the regulations of the sector with, what editors and journalists want to talk about. So I guess from your experience, like from the journo side, with your journo hat on, what are you looking for in terms of a great story?
Well, I think that the most important thing is context. I think a lot of times you get really inside the mentality of the client, and the client thinks everything's a story. Everything's a great story. And sometimes listening to that client tell you, I've got a great story, here it is. And you can hear immediately, this is not a story. This is not going to resonate. This is not going to work with clients, with press. And that's really tricky because clients get really excited. And also bear in mind, you need to be smarter than the client because that's why they hired you. If clients could do their own comms and get coverage without you, believe me, they would do that because it would be a lot cheaper. But the fact is they can't, because they, generally speaking, are so immersed in their subject matter, they don't see the forest for the trees, and they don't see the context of what's happening in the world. For example, you may be pitching something that is specific to a specific region, but actually what's happening in that region at the moment is something completely unrelated, but it's a huge story. So no one is going to write about that region without addressing the other thing that's been happening there. You have to have context. And I always say, no matter what you're pitching, the same rules apply. And I know this from experience because I've worked across a very wide range of different sectors. You have to know what's happening in your sector. And by that, I mean Google News searching. So you go Google, and then you don't just look down. You have to go to the news tab. So it's like images, news, and then you can read all the articles about that. But you shouldn't just be Googling your company name, okay? You should be Googling the competitors and see what they're saying about what articles are they appearing in. If your subject matter, say you worked on AstraZeneca and your subject matter was COVID vaccinations. Well, I would Google Moderna, Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer. I Google vaccinations. I might Google blood clots. I would Google words and concepts which are peripheral to what I'm going to be pitching. If I'm talking about, say, AstraZeneca, I would probably Google also England, UK, COVID. You want to Google things and read into things that are connected, even peripherally, tangentially to what you're pitching. Without context, you cannot pitch, because the journalist you're pitching to has context. When I worked at MSNBC, I had 4 hours a day to read in. I had 2 TVs at my desk, and I spent 4 hours every morning reading every single newspaper in the world before I wrote a single word of my political show. Now, you don't have 4 hours a day, I get it, but there are quick ways to read in on your subject. Find newsletters you can subscribe to that give you a daily briefing. But find general places like Apple News that you can quickly scroll down and read what's happening. I highly recommend downloading the Mail Online app on your phone. And the reason is, whether you hate it or not, they are parasites and they steal from every newspaper around the world. So if you have the Mail Online app and you do like UK Home, US Home, UK Showbiz, US Showbiz, and just scroll down, you will get a very quick read on everything that's happening. And for example, if there's a big study on obesity, there's a big study on coffee and its connection to lowering the risk of cancer. Those things always show up there. And those may be things that are connected to what you're pitching and things that you need to know about, so that A, you can pitch that out that day and get coverage. But B, if that's what everyone's talking about, don't pitch out something that day that says the opposite. So it's important to have context when you pitch. So journalist has context. They're generalists. They know a little bit about everything. So you need to know that too. And I think one of the biggest mistakes that PRs make is pitching something out based on their timeline, their timings, what they need to do, but not on what's going to work and what's happening in the world. You need context. You can't just pitch in a vacuum or in a bubble. You have to think about what's happening in the world the day that you're sending that out.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good one. And some, it sounds so common sense, but I think it is something that we sometimes overlook in getting so wrapped up in, this is my launch day. I've been planning this launch for 6 months, 12 months, and this is the day. And forgetting that, as you said, it's happening in the context of the wider global environment, regional environment, national environment, and things that are happening. I wanted to come back to kind of something that you said as well, around being like loving the low high, because I also love that as well. Like I love, kind of the trashy stuff, but then also, the really high science, kind of health stuff as well. And so, I think you strike a really nice balance, especially with your lifestyle kind of writing that like skews towards health in bringing those two things together. But I guess what would be your top tips for people who are trying to tell that type of health story, which tends to skew high science or really technical in a way that resonates for those, kind of lifestyle journalists, because, we're really looking to crack into, the Sun, the Evening Standard, Telegraph, those types of publications.
Well, I think that you really should look at what they're writing about and see how your story can tie into that. For example, I'm working with a client right now, and there's a study that showed that this particular, I won't name the client, but this particular thing can benefit autistic kids. Well, autism and autistic children, that's something that's written about across every publication, whether it's, everyone's interested in that because so many of us have autistic children or friends with autistic children. So it's a very common thing. I think it's 1 in 4. This is a big thing. So if you can tie your thing into something people are talking about. Now, there are things that are very topical right now, COVID, obesity, cancer. I mean, these are things that people are always talking about. So if you can find a way to link what you have to talk about into something that's already something people are talking about, it'll go a lot farther to getting you coverage. Additionally, I have a background in showbiz and people might even know me from that, but celebrity has pervaded everything. I mean, even in the Wall Street Journal, or you could take the kind of fanciest newspaper or publication and there's still celebrity involvement, like endometriosis, for example. Susan Sarandon has endometriosis. Padma Lakshmi is like a spokesperson. She's a famous celebrity in the States and a chef. There are celebrities who come out who say, I have endometriosis. If I was working for something to do with endometriosis and it emerged that another celebrity has come out and said, I have endometriosis, I would use it as a hook. I would pitch that day and say, today, Selena Gomez has talked openly about her struggle. She's not unusual. In fact, 1 in 3 women today have, and then, use that. There's no shame in that because everyone else is doing that too. It gives you a talking point and it gives you a way in. Celebrity is a great way to do that. Stories that people are already interested in and they're, you know what they are, is a great way to do that. So look at the things that the magazine or place you want to be is already talking about and see how you can kind of tie it. We call it newsjacking, but how can you tie your information into that? Really important here is it's not what you want to say, it's what they want to hear. You need to frame your pitch. It's not what the client wants you to say, it's what they want to hear. One of the biggest mistakes that PRs make is to see their pitch as a sales pitch. I'm pitching I'm selling this to you today. It's not. It's a tool for information delivery. That's what you have to see it as. Stop thinking about what the client wants you to say and start thinking about what the journalist wants to hear. They want newsworthy stuff. They want relevant stuff. They want stuff they understand in 3 sentences or less. That's what they want. So you have to get out of the client mindset a little bit and put yourself in their mindset. And I think that's really challenging. I think a lot of PRs get so deeply in tune with their clients. They start to think like their clients. But that's a mistake because you're going to miss out. If you think like your client too much, you're going to miss out on opportunities. You need to be smarter than they are.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think, in terms of newsjacking, I think that's a great way to think about it, isn't it? In that, you don't necessarily have to contract that celeb, but you can still hop on to the fact that people are talking about a specific person in relation to a health condition or a health issue, obviously in a sensitive way, but using that as a news hook, because I think people always think, especially if you work for an NGO or, an organization where you don't have a big budget for influencer engagement or a celebrity kind of talent to act as an ambassador for whatever you're doing, or you're not working on a campaign that is, kind of disease awareness in that way where you can use a celeb like that. So I think that's a great way of thinking about that. That slightly, kind of turns it on its head.
Well, celebrities are also so open now. I mean, they talk about all kinds of things they never talked about before. Look at fertility. How many celebrities have come out and said, I can't have a baby. I tried. I'm even Paris Hilton, who's now denied that she is actually pregnant, which is a very awkward situation. But she's come out and said, I'm having IVF treatments. Rihanna talked, I think, about freezing her eggs. So, I mean, the openness is unprecedented. Celebrities are like really talking about private things. So if you follow even that Mail Online and you read down UK Home and US Home, you'll see these personal revelations, which you can tie into because celebrities are really talking about health stuff. I mean, Lena Durham is like documented all of her surgeries and post pictures of her scars. I mean, this kind of stuff is really out there and it gives you a good in.
Great. Yeah, I want to come back as well to, I call it I've just been starting to call COVID the C word because it's just everywhere, right? And I think we're all kind of sick of it, of talking about it, but yet it's still here. People working within the health sector, that's all we talk about all day long. We have a question, around, it is really tough to land stories, especially health stories at the moment with the media landscape really saturated with COVID. Kind of what do you need from a health story to help achieve cut through when there's so much focus on the pandemic? And if you're talking about something else, do you absolutely have to have a COVID link still? What's your perspective on that? How would you frame that?
Well, I think that a COVID link helps, but if it's not, let's say it's about something else related to another disease, kidney disease or diabetes or cancer, I would say then I would look for ways to tie it into something that people are interested in. For example, diabetes. A lot of people put weight on during lockdown. That's a fact. Like there's even a stat, the average person gained 8 pounds or something. Or it might've been 8 kilos, but regardless, I would look at that and say the average person, whatever that stat is, put on. And by the way, it doesn't have to be your stat. Okay. If it's a stat that somebody else did, that's not a competitor of yours, you can quote that with a little asterisk in your pitch. And then at the bottom, source it. It doesn't have to be your original research in a pitch. But you can say, this, and then tie it into how many weight people gained in lockdown. If you have a story about a pill for kidney disease or something, then I would first find out how can I make this relevant now? And I would look at, is kidney disease on the rise? Does alcohol consumption affect kidney disease? Because believe me, everybody was drinking more during lockdown. So were there things happening in the world that would have affected what I'm talking about? And can I tie it into that? So we know what happened. Okay, lockdown happened. People drank more, they ate more. Does this tie into that? Lockdown finished. People are massively stressed out because every other day there's a new variant. The travel guidelines changed. I'm in red Turkey. That doesn't look like it's going to go amber. That's stressful. I got to figure out how I'm going to get home. Stress and anxiety has increased. Social anxiety. People got used to staying home. Now they're going out. Think about what's happening in the world. Think about how that might tie into your story. And I would say that's where you start. And then also put yourself in the position of somebody who isn't super knowledgeable about this thing, but what would make it interesting to them? Think about how you would talk about this to someone at a dinner party, someone you met. What would you say? How would you describe it? I had a call with a PR agency not long ago, and for 45 minutes they were explaining to me this initiative that the brand was doing, and I couldn't understand what it was. I literally could not understand in 45 minutes what it was. And finally, somebody said, It's like a fitness watch for your brain. And I went, oh, okay, now I get it. It's a fitness watch for your brain. It took us 45 minutes to get that. So I said, make that the subject line. It's a fitness watch for your brain. And then you can explain it in it. If you can't figure out how to make it interesting and relevant, talk to somebody. It doesn't have to be somebody on your client's the same account. It could be somebody else on a different account and say, look, if I talk about this, what's interesting to you? What do you think is interesting about this? Or maybe just talk about it and eventually you'll try and explain it and you'll figure out how to explain it well.
Yeah, I love that. I do that actually with my best friend. It's kind of going back to your like 3 sentences. It's like I always try my like elevator pitch on her because she's not in health and not in the sector. And so it's like, can she get what I'm trying to say? And then I have her say what she took away from that. And if it's not what I want the journalist to take away, then I probably need to like reframe it. So I think it's like, that kind of practice is super helpful. We've got a couple questions in the chat. And the first one is around back on the newsjacking kind of thing. That they would be keen to know, how PRs can navigate the newsjacking opportunities when a lot of the health news in the UK is quite sensitive at the moment. So around, NHS waiting lists, delayed operations, how can we toe the line between offering our clients expertise without coming across as too promotional?
Yeah, that's a great question, whoever asked that, because you don't want to be seen as like, hey, everyone's dying. So guess what? I've got a pill. Like, it's like, you have to be sensitive. And I think that the only thing I can say is, and I have worked with clients in very sensitive situations before, is to use good judgment. You have to really look at it and say, does this sound like I'm trying to capitalize on someone else's misery? And if it does, how can I reframe this? But language is a great thing, and mastering the English language is a great thing, because there are ways to write something that shows respect and sensitivity, but still comes across. Like, I think, for example, you had something connected to an NHS waitlist, as you've said, and you say, this is a bad thing, and you try to find something, but however, it's what we're doing to try and help, or this is a terrible thing, we can all agree. However, this might make things better. This could help. Try to then quickly talk about something that's a solution to a problem. But, identifying a problem is kind of the first part of the pitch. You have to explain why it's important to talk about this medication. You don't just start with the medication, you talk about the illness, and then you talk about the medication. That's how you set it up. So you have to kind of first say, yeah, endometriosis does matter because 1 in 5 women have endometriosis, and here's what we're doing. So you do kind of have to talk about the problem before the solution, but you can do that in a way, if you're thoughtful, you can do it in a way that's not offensive.
Definitely. And I mean, I think part of the challenge with solutions is that we can't always or rarely even talk about the solutions themselves, right? I think we're in such a regulated environment that we actually can't even get to that without, kind of crossing lines. And so I think we are always in this balance in the sector, especially when we're working with pharma, that a lot of people on this call would be in kind of talking about the issue in a way that makes it still feel tangible without being able to talk about the solution directly. And so I feel like it does force us to be more creative in that way, which is a good thing, but it does make it more challenging.
It's really hard when your hands are tied. You have research you can't talk about, you have results, but they're promising, but it's not finished. And the client still wants coverage. And the only thing I would say to that is, sometimes the art is really managing the client expectations as much as it is getting the journalist to write about it. Because I've had so many times people want me to get coverage on something that's not done. There is no outcome yet. It's just, it's not finished. No one's going to write about it. And I'll say to them, I can't do this until it's done. It's like launching a new hotel before there's photos. Like I can't, it's impossible. No one's going to do that. You need a picture. So you have to kind of manage your client's expectations. And that's really challenging. It can be quite tricky to do, but that's part of the art of what you're doing.
Definitely. We've got another question in the chat. It says, we have a well-known expert who is working with a client on a campaign, but isn't landing any interviews with nationals. And we only have a short-term contract to complete these interviews with the expert. Any advice on ways to help make this land? We've tried newsjacking with them and no results still.
Yeah, that's really tough. I've had a lot of times where clients want coverage for their CEO and people aren't interested. That's a tough one. There really is no way to make people want to talk to your guy. Okay. If they don't want to talk to your guy and they think it's boring or not that interesting, there is no way to do that. The only thing you can do is try and find an issue or subject that your guy, female included, obviously, your guy, meaning gal and guy, can talk about. That would be interesting. So for example, sorry, my nose is so itchy. I work with a private jet. I've worked with a private jet company, and they always want to get their CEO on, on various TV shows. I try to find things related to private aviation, subjects that he's willing to talk about, and then pitch him. So if the story isn't working with this expert, I would look at a different story. I would look at a different angle, and it may not even be what that person wants to talk about, but it might be something they can talk about or they're happy to talk about. So if you're not getting traction on this story with that expert, but they want you to use that expert, I might try to find out, well, okay, can you talk about this? This is happening in the news. Can you speak to this? Is this something that's relevant to your experience? For example, with the jets, the guy is a pilot himself. So when COVID happened, there was a huge pilot shortage. That doesn't exactly have to do with private jets, although it does relate to private jets, but this was a pilot shortage for the big airlines, right? But he can talk about that because he's a pilot. And he does work with pilots. So there are ways to find an in with a story that's connected, but not exactly what they want to talk about. So if they're not interested in your guy based on their CV, then you have to find other stories that they can talk about that they might want.
Yeah. And I also feel like, part of the challenge sometimes is pitching that person with a point of view that's slightly different than what everyone else is saying, right? Because I think sometimes, it's not just, we want our CEO on TV, but we want them to say something that actually isn't that interesting or new or different. And so I think, it's about challenging as well, isn't it? What they're prepared to have an opinion or a point of view on.
A lot of it they'll find too controversial. So you find a good story angle, they're like, no, I can't say that. That's going to offend somebody. So that's a tricky one. But I would say a couple of things. One is, in terms of stats and pitching for stories, you always want to find the most extreme opposite stats. So I think a mistake that a lot of PRs make is they'll be like, oh, 34%, whatever, but 31%. Like, that's the same number. If it's plus or minus 6, as far as I'm concerned, it's the same. So look for the numbers that are the farthest apart and pitch me those. I was pitching something for a client the other day, and one was 69% and one was 7%. And I said, perfect, because it was 10 times. Journalists like that. So I was like, this is 10 times more than this. I didn't pitch it as 10 and 69. I said, this is 10 times more than this. That gets people's attention. So if it's a 2 times or double, or people like that more than numbers. Numbers, people are like skimming over, they're barely paying attention. So give me extremes. And also, if there are, say, activities involved, and they did this study and it showed that, give me the most opposite. So cycling versus yoga, strength training versus, like, give me opposites. Don't give me 2 things that are really similar. That's not a story. So you're always looking for opposites, extremes. That makes it more newsworthy for the journalist, for sure.
Definitely. And I think sometimes as well, when we have new research, we go for the biggest stat, but sometimes the biggest stat isn't the most surprising stat.
Yes.
And so it's kind of like, what is the most surprising nugget of information that we're trying, that, we can get across with this, that still lands the story that we're trying to tell, right? But
for sure. Like if you were talking about cigarettes and the biggest stat was, it causes cancer. You're like, yeah, but everybody already knows that. That's not a story. Yeah. But if you had a story that it improves your memory, but it was like a smaller number, I would want to know if cigarette smoking improves memory, something that people don't expect. Definitely.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we're waiting for some more questions to come in. I have one going back to kind of what you touched on, which is like, obviously you are in the lucky position that you worked on the newsroom side. So you have a lot of really good contacts within, media. I think something that we've really struggled with, and I think especially juniors as they've been coming in over COVID times, like have not really had the chance to build up really strong relationships with media, because it's, no one's been in the office, everyone's doing everything on phone or and chasing on emails. They're not even in the office for us to ring them. And so I feel like, part of the fun, but also the nerve-wracking bit of being a PR person has been lost. And so, thinking about media familiarizations as things start to open up, in places like the UK and other places, like, do you think those are coming back? Do you still see the value in those as a journalist, or, kind of, I guess, how do you see that changing, as we move forward?
Okay, so I would say a couple of things. Number one, if you had a friend and every single time they saw you, they asked you for something, every single communication with this friend, they asked you for a favor, you would not be super excited to see this person. And PRs need to realize that the journalist PR relationship needs to be mutually beneficial. And if every time you contact a journalist, all you're doing is saying, will you write about my client, which is most of us, that's really not the best way to build connection. And inviting somebody out to lunch, also bear in mind, you are getting paid to take a journalist out to lunch. You may even get pressure to take a journalist out to lunch. The journalist does not get paid to go to lunch with you, does not get pressure to go to lunch with you, and actually probably gets taken away from something they have to finish by the end of the day to go to lunch with you. So it's not as attractive to the journalist at all to go to lunch as it is for you. However, there's lots of ways to build connection. I don't think it's a bad thing to invite somebody to go to lunch, but I wouldn't start with that. Probably what I'd start with is praise. Now, when you guys have a big client coverage win, and I know this, you get like, hey, dream team, great job. Well, then you get lots of praise. I'm getting all kinds of cat emojis. I'm getting, really nice, positive affirmation. Journalists get zero. The only time you hear back is if it's bad. So you send in your copy, you get immediately, if you hear back immediately, it means it's bad. And it's like, this is too short, change your intro, update based on what had just happened yesterday in the news, too long, cut it down, whatever. It's always negative. And then it runs, you still hear nothing. I filed something a couple of weeks ago for Forbes. I had a really clever ending, which I loved. The editor said nothing. The piece got published. He cut out the ending entirely. I never had any feedback about why. I had no idea if he liked it. And then he put it on his LinkedIn and said, brilliant piece by Ashley. He never told me any of that. Okay. So if you read something you like by a journalist that you want to connect with, email them and say that. Not every communication has to be a pitch. Email and say, I loved your article about such and such, especially this part, or I like this line, or I thought this was really insightful, this part. So shows that you really read it. Compliment them. Journalists live for that because they're creatives, but they get very little feedback and almost none of it's positive. Nobody in the newsroom says to you, hey, great piece. That was nobody says that. Only thing you hear is negative. So the other thing I would say is, you mostly probably subscribe to things like Rox Hill, where you see where people are moving. So it's like, so-and-so started at this magazine, so-and-so started here. Let me tell you a secret. Everybody answers email on the first day. Everybody. Why? Because they literally just started. They probably are sitting around waiting for like some kind of HR, indoctrination. They don't know that many people have their new email address. So they're bored. And you write to them and say, congratulations on your promotion at the FT. You'll probably be hearing lots from me because I write about this. Like, why don't you do that? Like people are going to read that. And then the next time they see your email, they'll probably reply. And in terms of the actual media familiarization, what I would say is be creative. So for example, a lot of journalists are working from home. If somebody messaged me and said, look, I'd love to take you to lunch because of COVID and everything else, I know it's tricky. Let me deliver you something from your favorite restaurant. And maybe we can have a virtual chat, during or right after. Would that be okay? If somebody wrote to me and said, I want to Uber you some Starbucks, can we have a coffee together? Like, I would totally say yes to that. And I don't do lunches with people. I hate them. I almost never do them. So I would do both of those things. be creative about it. Another thing I used to do was, there was a woman at the Times, and she was really tricky. I mean, she basically hated all PRs, and but she was a foodie, and so I would always like look up the new restaurant. I knew she liked Nobu. I was working with Nobu, and I always would be like, do you want to go to Nobu? Let's have a press appointment at Nobu. I thought of places I knew she wanted to go, and I kind of won her over that way. Another thing is, look at where their office is, figure out the best place near their office. If they're at the Telegraph, figure out what's close, the Hawksmoor or whatever, and then offer them that. Say, I looked this up, but if there's another place you like better, we can go there. Think about what's convenient for them. Most journalists do not have time to go across town to Covent Garden or Mayfair. So think of a place that's near them that's super nice, and then start with that.
Yeah, I love that, because I think a lot of people, well, a lot of PRs probably, you know, our default is to be like, oh, we want to schmooze, so we want to take somewhere nice, but we don't necessarily, as you say, think about where are they coming from, how much time do they really have to give up? Yeah.
They don't have a lunch. I remember when I first started at NBC, and I was like, when is lunch? And they're like, this is lunch. Everyone eats at their desk. They really don't take a lunch. So it's a big deal. You guys take a lunch, which is nice. I mean, that's nice about working in PR. You get a lunch. Journalists typically don't. So it is a sacrifice to leave their desk. So if you can figure out ways to make it worth their time, then I would say, you know, or be creative, like sending a Deliveroo or offering to Uber over some coffee and then have a chat. That's a great way to kind of cut through and get a yes.
Yeah, no, and it is a good reminder for us, you know, that they are just normal people, right? I think it goes back to your first point that like not every time you talk to them has to be an ask, because like no one likes that kind of relationship. Like it's just at the end of the day, it's building a relationship with, you know, individuals one-to-one. We do kind of, you know, media mills, I guess, in terms of like a one-off event every year, but our rule is no pitching on the day. Like, you know, we get people in the room, and to be honest, that's why people come, because it's a chance to have a drink. It's outside of work hours, but also like they know if they come that we're going to talk to them about their cat, or we're going to talk to them about their cycling that they love or whatever, but we're not going to pitch them stories all night, because otherwise, you know, for them, it just feels like more work. So, you know, I think I love the prompt to be more creative, and think about, you know, the ways that you can engage with them and, you know, in a mutually beneficial fashion that feels like you care about them, which you should.
Absolutely. You know, treat them like a human, not like a robotic sort of person who's parroting client messaging all the time. You know, I do coverage coaching, and I always say, you know, if someone said to you, who are your competitors? What would you say? If they said, look, I haven't heard of this, who are your competitors? And a lot of PRs feel uncomfortable, you know, saying who their competitors are. And I always say, don't, you know, be honest, be real, and say, well, this and this is probably who most people would see as our competitors. However, what sets us apart is that we are X, you know, and even if you said, you know, what sets us apart is that we're less expensive. That's okay. Like be a normal human being. You know, I'm mentioning this jet brokerage. They don't want to be called a brokerage. They are a brokerage, but they do not. So they have to be like the global leader in marketing strategies or whatever. Like that's how you talk about them. But I wouldn't talk to if I was talking to a journalist in a pitch, I would call them a broker. Like be a real person. And so, as I said, you are not the client. I can't tell you how many times I've said to a PR who's with an agency, why don't we try this? And they say, well, we wouldn't do that. And I'm like, who's we? You're not in-house. Like, come on, like you're me, we're you, we're not we. Because the thing is, the clients pay a lot of money, and you spend a lot of time trying to understand the client, which is your job. I get it. That's a really important thing. But it's not just understanding the client. You're supposed to stand in that gap between client messaging and journalistic interest. You need to live in that no man's land. Don't get in bed with the client, because what happens is you only see their perspective. Your job is to be smarter than them and to guide them towards something else. I mean, I have talked a client into something so crazy recently that I'm shocked that they said yes. Seriously, I'm shocked. They're going to get great coverage, but it was definitely not something I thought they would be comfortable with. And they were, because they liked that it was so out there. I always say, if you never say in a meeting, this may sound crazy, but you're not doing your job. Okay. Yeah. You have to be the person who's willing to think outside the box.
Yeah. And I think that, that's kind of key to landing like good stories, right? It's the stories that haven't been told yet, the ones that are surprising, that are different, that are newsworthy. It kind of touches on this next question that we've got, which is in terms of looking for those stories, like creating those stories. Kind of what are your top tips for comms people in helping identify the best stories within our clients' businesses or within your organization?
Yeah, another suggestion I would make is to read what other articles are saying. So for example, I mentioned Google News searching. Well, I also have an Express VPN where I can say that I'm in New York and I can read the New York, US publications. I can move it myself to Australia and read the Australian papers or whatever. Most good ideas have been done before. In fact, the CEO of Apple, Tim Cook, actually said that all good ideas come from somebody else. And this is a company famous for innovation. So there's no shame in getting an idea from something else. So for example, if I'm PRing something related to sexual health or, whatever, I might be reading something in the New York Post about that subject with a great headline. And I would use that headline as the subject line in my pitch. That's totally fair to do. Your pitch is not being published. You can take a headline from a great article from 2018 and use it as the subject line in your pitch. And that's a great way to get journalists' attention, because if your subject line reads like a headline, something they would automatically read. So I would say steal a headline from a story that is about your subject and make that your subject line. I steal ideas all the time. Maybe you can slightly tweak it so it fits what you're doing, but it might be like 5 reasons why blah, blah, blah. And you're like, oh, that's perfect. And then you do yours as 5 reasons why blah, blah, blah. And it's connected. So clickbait and sort of making them want to open it is super important as well, because a lot of editors get thousands. I only, I'm a part-time writer and I get hundreds of pitches a day. Friends of mine who are editors at the Daily Mail and Metro get thousands. A friend of mine at Glamour said to me, we don't even read any emails unless they're internal because we get too many. They don't even open it unless it's an internal email or it's somebody they know. So how do you get cut through? You have to write a clickbaity kind of headline. And in health, it's tricky because you don't want to seem too glib. 7 out of 10 people are going to die. Like, you can't make a clickbait about something like that. So you have to be really thoughtful about making it clickbaity, but also making it sensitive, not outrageous. And I think that's a really unique challenge that you face. However, there are people doing it well, and there are ways to do it well. Yeah,
no, I think that's super important. I do want to touch on the kind of difference between engaging as a comms person with a freelance writer and a full-time kind of like in-house writer, because I think it's something that for me, it feels like we're sleeping on a little bit in terms of, being able to harness a really good relationship with a freelancer. So from your perspective, like obviously being freelance, like what are the pros and cons of kind of engaging with each?
Well, I would say freelancers are harder to find because everybody knows how to find the staff writers, just look them up on, whatever you use. Freelancers are trickier because they move around. So you're like, well, this person was a good freelancer, and now I don't know what happened to them. They just fell off the radar. However, freelancers are gold because if you get a freelancer interested in your story, they may write it for 4 publications. You may get 4 pieces of coverage out of one freelancer because they like that story. And then they pitch it to 4 different places, and because they get paid when they write about it. So if you can connect, I would say I would focus on freelancers a lot. I would spend time on them. I would gift them. I would send them cupcakes with the picture of my client on it. I would do something to win over freelancers, because if they are health specific, or even if they don't just write health, but they do a lot of health, you want to win them over because they're looking for stories. They also pitch every day. You're not the only, they pitch. They have to pitch their editor to try and get a commission to get paid. If you give them good pitches that they can quickly turn around into pitches for themselves, you are literally putting money in their pocket. They will love you. They will come to you and say, hey, any ideas this week? What are you doing? And that's what you want to cultivate. So and a lot of staff writers go freelance. They have a baby. They end up having to do 4 jobs instead of 1 because there's been all these cuts at the Guardian or wherever. So they quit and go freelance. It happens every single day. So if you can find freelancers I would seriously work on cultivating those relationships. Staff writers are, of course, easier to find because they've got targets on their back. We know how to get them. And I think they're also really important to try and cultivate relationships. But I think the staff is more straightforward. Everybody knows what to do. I think the freelancer is, and don't write and be like, are you working on anything right now? What are you working on right now? Like, that's super annoying. Don't do that. Go to them with an idea. Don't ask them what they're working on. And then that's lazy, by the way. It's like asking someone for their editorial calendar. Don't do that. That's super irritating. First of all, it changes constantly. So even if they give it to you, it could be completely moot in a week. So it's not useful. And secondly, it's lazy. Go to them with an idea. Don't ask them for an idea and then see how you can fit into it. Go to them with an idea, get straight to the point. Don't do all this preamble, hope you're well, question mark, all this stuff. Just get straight to the point. Get straight to the point in 3 sentences, tell them what you've got, and see it as a tool for information delivery, not a sales pitch about your client.
Yeah. I love it. And I think it's definitely a shift, right? In the way that we have approached writing stories or PR, because like there was a time a while ago where there was a very set editorial calendar for, especially for kind of the monthly magazines or the longer lead magazines, whereas now the news just changes so quickly that, like as you say, it could be completely different in a couple of weeks' time. But I think that is a mindset shift and a reminder for us as we're working that like some of those ways that we might have worked previously are not necessarily right for how we are approaching, kind of story crafting and relationships with journalists these days.
Now, I'm just seeing this question. What is your view on when to give an exclusive? And then what tips would you give? I would say this. If there's a journalist that this story's perfect for, like this person is the person who should write about this, I would definitely say go to them first and say, look, I'm happy to give you an exclusive on this, and give them a deadline. I need to know by tomorrow afternoon if this is something you want to do. Then follow up and say, I just double checking before I make this a kind of a wider distributed thing. Is this something you want to do? And then I would absolutely recommend that if you know in your heart, this person is perfect for this story, this is my ideal target. And in terms of what tips I would give, I had a situation recently where we had offered it to a few people, and then one person came back and said, I'll do it if it's exclusive. And that person was a great person to do it. We wanted that person. So the question was, what do we do in that situation? What I said at the time was offer the expert exclusively to the publication, the top tier that we want to be in. So you may have already distributed it to a few people, and one person comes back and says, I'll do it if it's exclusive. You can still get around that by giving that person exclusive access to your expert. So then they still get an exclusive, even though the other people know about the story. They can't write it in the same way without that access. So there's still a way around that. If it's sort of the horse is already out of the barn, there's a way to still kind of save that.
Great. Fantastic. I feel like we have time for a couple more questions. So I have a couple for you, and then I will keep my eye on here as well. But in terms of I know you write freelance, like, as you said, what kind of 1 day a week for a number of different publications. But in terms of the stories that you're writing, what percentage would you say have some sort of involvement or content that's provided from a PR?
Oh, okay. Basically all of them, almost all of them. I'm working with a PR, whether I'm doing a hotel review, whether I'm writing about a trend, whether I'm writing about something in culture, society, health, every single one, I'm working with a PR. And I think that it is absolutely true. I did want to say this though about case studies. You guys always get all this pressure to find a case study. I never expect the PR to find my case study. I really don't. And I know from working at the Daily Mail, about 70% of the time is looking for case studies when you write a piece there. They have agencies who help them find case studies. So if you have a story and you're like, I can't pitch this, I don't have a case study. Yes, you can. You do not have to supply a case study for every story you pitch. If they like your story, they'll look for their own. So I wouldn't feel totally handcuffed about having a case study before you can pitch anything. That's not the case. If it's a good story and you have data but no case study, let them earn their fee and find one themselves. They have ways to do that. And a lot of big publications expect to do it themselves, and they want their own because maybe they feel like yours is going to be biased or paid by the client, or somehow going to be less credible. So they probably don't want yours in that sense, because maybe they don't trust the credibility as much because it came from you. So I wouldn't overly obsess about having to have a case study to prove everything. Case studies do matter, and it's really helpful if a PR says, for example, going back to this autism thing, this product can help autistic kids. If the PR says, look, we found this data that shows it helps autistic kids, and we've got a case study, that will get it across the line faster. It is a good thing, but it's not a necessity if you don't have one.
Good. So it would basically, don't trash the story just because you don't have a case
Yeah.
study.
If you can get one, great. But if you can't, you can still pitch without.
Amazing. What is the story that you are proudest of telling, or having a hand in telling, and also equally one that surprised you the most?
Okay, so the serious one, of course, it was 9/11, and I got an award for that, and I worked on it for 90 days, and it was the most important story I've ever worked on as a journalist. I was there, I saw them fall, you know, it was a horrible, awful story, but I was proud of the work that I did and the dedication I had. I didn't have a day off in 3 months. It was a lot. But I can tell you one that was personally, I know it's ridiculous, but I was on a gossip column in New York. I worked for MSNBC.com, and I had a TV on my desk, and I was watching Regis and Kathy Lee, the morning talk show, like or something. And the host, the woman, never wore a bra. Like, or if she did, it was like the worst bra ever, and it was so weird because she was kind of middle-aged, and it was just awkward. And I said to my boss, like, I'm serious. They must be getting complaints about this because this is offensive. So she said, well, call and ask. So I called, and I was like, you know, do you ever get complaints that, you know, this or that, she doesn't wear a bra? And they were like, well, you know, maybe. Like, they didn't deny it. So we did it as a story. Anyway, fast forward, like, it ended up on the front page of the National Enquirer. Every single newspaper picked it up in the world. And she was on David Letterman a week later, and he asked her about it. And she did the joke where she like threw her bra or something. And I remember watching that and laughing because that was totally me at my little desk, noticing something that I thought other people would have noticed. And I was right. And it ended up across the world. And it was one of many things, by the way, that was just my little weird brain going, I bet people would think that. And then it turned out to be an international, global story where in this case, celebrity themselves was asked about it and had to make a joke about it because it got everywhere. So that kind of stuff was surprising, how you could have this little ripple and it could become like a global conversation. And that always made me smile when I saw that happen.
No, I love that. It's just like a brainwave in the moment, isn't it?
Yeah. And actually, you know what, if you touch on something that is part of the zeitgeist, that is something that other people think and feel, you can turn it into a global movement. We see this happen all the time with like viral videos or things go viral. It can happen. It's not just with dogs dancing. It can happen with observations or thoughts about how two things connect. How often do you use social media? I don't mind pitches on social media. I would say Instagram and Facebook, no, because they tend to be really private and family or friend-based. But LinkedIn and Twitter, absolutely. In fact, you should be following all the journalists you want to pitch to on Twitter, because here's why. Journalists always want you to have read what they write. But if you go to Daily Mail and put my name in, you'll see like 10% of the articles I've written. But if you follow me on social, you'll see all the art, because I almost always tweet what I write, unless I'm embarrassed about it. Mostly I'm not. Journalists have to tweet what they write. So if you follow them, you have a kind of an idea of what they've been working on. Or if you don't read them, you can quickly go to their feed and scroll down and see what they've been writing before you communicate. So and as far as pitching on LinkedIn, I often do that. I worked for a client where was a celebrity owner, and he just wanted to be an Architectural Digest. That was it. And he has nothing to do with Architectural Digest, by the way, but he reads it. I didn't know anybody at Architectural Digest. And so I went to the deputy editor. Another tip, don't pitch the editor. They're rarely there. They're working on getting money from advertisers. They're not. Go to the deputy. That's the person who's going to be in charge. And connect with them on LinkedIn, send a note, say, look, would you mind if I sent you a pitch? I've got a story about whatever. Say what it is. Don't be vague. Just be like, I've got a story about how obesity is on the rise. Can I give you a pitch? And then if they say yes, they do prefer on here or on email. In my case, the guy at Arc Digest said, here's my email, send it to me. I sent it straight away and we got in. But I went through LinkedIn and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It's a professional tool and it's a networking tool and you can pitch on LinkedIn. But I would just say, do you mind a pitch on here or would you prefer your email? And if so, what email address is best? I pitch Bloomberg and stuff like that all the time.
Love it. And I love the harnessing the power of social media in that way. I think to your point about praising journalists as well, like it's so easy to send a nice tweet, right? When you see a piece of coverage, not just your coverage, but like in general, any coverage, you like love that story, right? And it takes 2 seconds, but I think it's something that like we can all do more of.
Also, a lot of journalists are writing books. Compliment their book, man. Offer to write an Amazon review for them. That's what they want, right? Compliment their book. You're going to get a reply straight away. I've seen it. I've done it recently, actually. Immediately, a top editor at the FT that I want to pitch immediately replied, thank you so much. Please write me an Amazon review.
Amazing. Amazing. Well, we are shortly running out of time. So I'm going to end with one question, which is, what is your key piece of advice that you would leave everyone with today?
You cannot pitch without context. You have to know what's happening in the sector and in the greater world out of your sector before you pitch anything. If you don't have context for what you're pitching, you will not get coverage. So make sure you understand what's happening in your sector and what's happening in the world in general before you send a pitch, or you just cannot get coverage. Context, there's a lot of things that matter, but context is the most important.
Amazing. Amazing. I mean, I could personally listen to you all day, and I'm so glad that you were able to join us for your holiday and give up your time. So I just want to say on behalf of everyone, thank you so much. Before we leave, I'm going to hand back over to Matt, who's going to give us a bit of a preview of what we have coming up for the PRCA Health Group in the next couple of months.
Thanks, Ash, and also thank you, Ashley. Thank you both for doing this from your respective holidays. It's been really fascinating to hear more about this. It was just first to say thank you all for joining and taking up your lunch hour to join us for today. We are going to be having a September conference for the PRCA annual conference this year, looking at all communications and media post-COVID. Hopefully we will be in that scenario then. So please go to the website to find further details and tickets. Thank you all for joining us today.
Thank
you guys.
Bye.
That's all. Bye.